Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to episode 2 in our playthrough at Sicily 43 from Assault Games. When we left off at the end of the last episode, we've got US Rangers riding Stuarts on a charge up to the contested farmstead. On the opposite side of the farmstead, we've got German armor and an anti-tank gun. Let's see what happens. Before we start turn 2, let's do a quick recap of turn 1 and of the scenario. US forces on the right, German forces on the left. The US forces hold this objective, the Germans hold this objective. The contested farmstead lies in the middle. In our first turn, our US forces took advantage of these fast-moving Stuart tanks, had some Ranger squads jump up onto them, and advanced at breakneck fast speed, racing towards this farmstead, hoping to reach there and unload the Rangers before the Germans can react and get up and get close within range. We also moved the Sherman up here for the US, nudged forward the machine gun, anti-tank gun, and the mortar team to basically try to provide covering fire for these advancing forces. The Germans, realizing they're losing the speed game, advanced infantry up into these trenches, onto these craters up in here, some brush, and then moved forward with their heavy, experienced armor. There are 2 tanks here, the Tiger and the Panzer J, as well as pushed up their anti-tank gun to get better firing positions on this farmstead. As we start out, the US are hoping for the initiative and hoping to get in here fast before the Germans can have some effective fire to take them apart. The battle really swings out. I have no idea whether this is a good idea or not. It could go any which way. Let's find out. We're going to roll first for initiative in turn 2. Blue die is the US, red is the German. 4-3, the US just edge out and get the jump on the Germans here. This could be interesting. Now first we go to our planning phase. We don't have command cards. We're not using the command cards in this scenario. I've got to allocate the command points. And I'm actually going to do that off camera. I showed how that worked yesterday. Unless it impacts play, I'm going to kind of talk about the command points basically being allocated in a way that kind of makes sense. But roughly, we're going to do the same thing for the US, allocating points to Rangers and the Stuarts here, the anti-tank gun, the machine gun, the mortar. Perhaps these Rangers and the Stuart down here. It's not quite enough, but we'll figure out where the priorities lie. Likewise for the Germans, command points are going to go to this armor, anti-tank gun for sure. They're going to need to get shots off, and this infantry up in here, and then we'll leave our 3 command points in reserve for both sides. So I'm doing that off camera, and now we can go to the next phase of the turn, which is the support phase. So the US has the initiative here in this support phase. Now we don't have any really anti-tank guns to change our facing of. The biggest thing that the US have in this support phase is this mortar, which can fire indirectly. And it's got some targets, because if we look at the backside of this mortar team's card, it talks about the special characteristics of indirect fire. Now we could also fire smoke up in here to try to block these tanks. I think that's actually a really good idea, but we're going to be a little aggressive and try to put the hurt on this anti-tank gun and drop some mortar rounds on it as it's in this brush up here, because this is also a dangerous opponent, and I'd like to start dealing some damage with the US forces. So if we look at the backside of the mortar team here, it can fire indirect fire at a range of 3 to 11 hexes. Now it has to spot the unit itself, or it has to have an adjacent unit spot it. It can spot it itself because the line of sight goes through this hex and this hindering hex and this hindering hex, not a third one. So they've got a line of sight to this, and it's within range. It's a range of 10 hexes here. We're going to use the attack dice specified here, and that's the first thing we're trying to do, is calculate the attack dice for this attack. We have 2 green and a blue by the indirect fire on this card, and notice that it also says the defender loses its weakest defense die. Now there's no other attack dice modifiers for the attacker here. Now let's calculate our defense dice. The unit itself, the 75mm anti-tank gun, has an inherent defense die of yellow when fired upon from the top. We get that from the unit card itself. And then it's going to get some defense dice from the terrain here as well. It's in brush and it's artillery. And if we look at the terrain chart, it's going to give us a green and a blue die for defense. Now there's a number of other calculations that have to be made here in terms of determining defense dice. The only one that has a bearing on this attack, none of the others factor in here, but the only one has the bearing on this attack is that this unit has to be spotted. It's hitting in brush right now. I have to see if the US can see it first. Now, the spotting roll for this one is a basic straight up. The US needs a 2 or greater in order to be able to spot this. So they're going to try to make that roll. They get out their binoculars. They get a 6. They spot it very easily. So there's no additional defense die added to the anti-tank gun because of unspotted or anything like that. But all these other things like dug in and half strength defender, unit experience level for the attacker and stuff like that, none of that stuff apply here. This is kind of the basic calculation. The only thing we want to remember to do is take away the weakest die as a special characteristic of this indirect fire. So now we've calculated our attack dice. The anti-tank, the mortar up here, 2 greens and a blue. The anti-tank gun will be defending with a yellow and a green. So here comes, let's move this out of the way. Here comes the mortar team firing on the anti-tank gun, hoping for lots of hits for the US. Oh, 2 suppressions, a critical, and a hit. Not a bad roll at all for the US there. Let's see how the anti-tank gun can defend. So the anti-tank gun, here's the mortar rounds coming in and they scamper for cover. They handle 1 hit, they negate 1 hit and a suppression. So now we're gonna figure out how this gets through, and let's calculate it. This actually has quite a bit of potential. So the defensive dice on the bottom here, now we're basically gonna negate them. The suppression knocks off the suppression. So those 2 dice can vanish, they are gone. That leaves us with the attacking, another suppression roll, a critical hit and a hit. Now the hit here negates the hit, so that's gone. That leaves a critical hit and a suppression on this anti-tank gun. So let's figure out what happened. A critical hit always causes 1 damage point of hits. So the anti-tank gun takes its first damage point. This, as we can tell from its card, is a 4 hit point unit. So this signifies a single hit of damage. So it takes some damage and there's been casualties. The mortar team has had a hit. And it's also got a suppression. So the anti-tank gun here is suppressed and hit hard. They've lost some casualties, got some men bleeding and wounded and stuff like that, and they're scampered for cover, they're dug in and trying to hide themselves. So that takes care of the suppression, and it takes care of the hit portion of the critical hit. However, now we have to take the critical hit portion of the critical hit into account. So now to do a critical hit, to assess a critical hit in the game, we make 1 more comparison roll. The attacker is given a green die, the defender is given a blue die, and we compare these results. Now I'm gonna say, artillery, there's a fallback result, which is kind of a retreat result, and if an artillery gets a fallback result, it's eliminated. This anti-tank gun could be in serious trouble depending upon the outcome of this roll, which would give the US a huge edge very early in this fight. So we're going to roll both dice at the same time and compare the green versus the blue result. If the US get an edge here, this could be huge. Oh, the green die is nothing, the blue die is suppression. The critical die, the critical hit has no effect, and the anti-tank gun survives the mortar round. But casualties incurred, first blood drawn as the mortar team pounds the anti-tank gun, suppressing them and causing them some casualties. The only other thing that we have to do with that activity is that is the mortar team's action for this turn. So they have fired and they are done for the turn. Now this anti-tank gun is suppressed, so their activation for this turn is over too. So they are digging for dirt here. It also takes a command point for the US to be able to fire that mortar. So I've added that, I flipped that command marker over on their card. So a very good support phase for the US here. Now, that took a while to calculate this one, and I will say that learning the game, that's probably taking me the longest, is calculating the dice. Once you get the dice calculated, things go fast. I've obviously explained things a lot here, so that took a while. This first turn with a lot of firing in it in the second turn is probably going to be a slower turn, and then I'm going to go faster as the playthrough goes through. I won't be explaining as much. So with the support phase done now, let's go to the activation phase. The US have the initiative here for this whole turn. So it's up to the US to decide what to do. As we come to the US first action in their turn here, we're going to be bold. We're going to, and actually this anti-tank gun getting suppressed is huge because that has some really good lines of fire on the units kind of to this side of this multi-story building in this house here. These tanks trying to fire through this, these are actually pretty hard targets to fire around. So these are lousy shots, especially if we come in towards the farmstead this way. And we're going to take advantage of that. So we're going to do a fire and move on this Stuart tank that's down here. Now that means it can move up to half of its movement allowance rounded up and execute a fire move in the same turn. What we're going to do is we're going to push it forward this way into this open hex. Now it could get reaction fire from these tanks, but with the line of sight, I've just checked this. This adds like a red die in defense, and this adds another, like a yellow die. This is a really lousy shot considering all the things that are in the way. And actually, I think for both of these units, I think all 3 of these hexes right now are in the line of sight. So it's just really bad math for what it is right now. However, it's going to move up here into the second hex here, right into these rocks. And what we're going to try to do is move up here, fire, and then have, in the next action, have the Rangers disembark and take the multi-story hex here, the farmstead here. That would be awesome. So I'm still not going to fire with the German tanks just because this is such a lousy shot behind these buildings. But we do have to do one thing before the Stuart can fire. That's to check to see if it gets damaged by this rocky terrain. So to do that, we have to make a die roll to see if the vehicle's damaged. For a tracked vehicle moving through rocky terrain, we have to roll a yellow die. And if that yellow die comes up damage, we have a chance to defend against it, but we'll talk about that if it happens. So let's see what happens with the yellow die. It is hit, so the Stuart does take some damage here from that, but it gets to roll its strongest defense die to see if it takes damage. And the Stuart's front has red, so it's that strongest defense die. So the Stuart, hoping to negate the damage from the rocks, it does 2 hits, so it negates the damage. It's a stronger roll than that. So it suffers no damage moving up into this rocky terrain, and now it can fire. Let's calculate the attack by the Stuart onto the anti-tank gun. First up, we want to calculate the attack dice. The Stuart, firing at a range of 6 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, gets a red, a green, and a blue die. However, because it did a fast action in the previous turn, it loses 1 attack die. Blue die, the weakest die, is gone, leaving it with a green and a red die, and it's firing on the anti-tank gun. Now, let's calculate the defensive status for the anti-tank gun. First up, it gets its inherent unit defense, and if we look at the card, we can see when fire is coming into the front, it gets a yellow defensive die. Now we want to calculate for the terrain. In brush, an artillery unit gets a blue and a green die as well, so that's added to the mix. We'll note the unit is also suppressed. Because they're cowering and taking cover, it gets an additional green die. Now we have to calculate one more thing here, which is the spotting roll, to see if the Stuart spots the anti-tank gun. An infantry unit and artillery unit spot on a 1 or a 2 normally. However, a tank, an armored unit, has a lesser range of vision here. It needs a 4 or greater to spot. It gets a 6, no problem, probably because it sees the smoke from where the anti-tank gun was hit by the mortars perhaps. So it successfully spots the anti-tank gun. However, there's one more defensive die penalty that's applied here, which is this move and fire. Now, one quick aside note, this is a prototype. This states fire and move. Even the icon here is move and then fire. This is a typo and it's fixed in the final version. So it is moving and firing. There is a kind of a ranged fire modification thing that we have to look at here to determine the impact of what additional die this is going to get in this circumstance. Normally, if it's just firing, this doesn't happen at all. If it's a move and fire, if we look on this chart, we can see that an artillery unit gets a plus green die, which is nice. However, the Stuart has a special ability, which is gun stabilization. And this means that instead of getting the fire and move or move and fire penalty, it uses the turret fire penalty for this one instead. So instead of the defender getting a green die, because the Stuart's gun is a stabilized gun, it uses that turret fire for a spotted unit, so it's only going to add a blue defensive die to it. Still, as we can see, this isn't a great shot, right? We got a green and a red. A red's nice, but they got a yellow, 2 greens, and 2 blues here for defensive dice. This is kind of a long shot, but I mean, we might as well take it, right? And I almost forgot one last thing. We'll notice here that the Stuart is firing, trying to fire up around this building here. The defensive modifier for a line of sight mod for that is another yellow die. So this anti-tank gun, this is a pretty lousy shot for the Stuart, but let's see if it can get a little bit lucky here. So the Stuart opens fire. Oh, it gets 1 hit. There is no way this 1 hit is going to have any damage with all these dice. Here's the defensive roll for the anti-tank gun. Yeah, it gets 3 critical blocks and 3 defensive hits. So no impact at all from the Stuart firing. But this one has now fired and moved, and the Stuart is done. Time for the Germans to try to get some retribution for the damage done to the anti-tank gun and try to stop this US advance. We're going to have the Tiger tank fire at the Stuart tank carrying these Rangers over here in wide open terrain. So it's got a range of 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The Stuart's in the open, so we don't have to make a spotting roll on it. At a range of 10 against armor, we get 2 red dice, a yellow die, and a blue die firing against the Stuart tank here. Now this Stuart tank, it should be noted, is a recruit level unit. So one of the things that always happens is firing against a recruit level unit, there is an automatic suppression effect that gets added to the attack roll. So this blue die we'll use just as an X. There's an automatic suppression that it has to fight off. So it's already got one result kind of with this. There's two other things that happen, however. This Tiger E is a veteran unit, so it gains another blue die. So we'll add that into the equation. And then attack die -1 because it did fast movement in the last turn. It's still kind of scattered trying to make a better shot. It loses its weakest attack die. So the attack dice for the Tiger are going to be 2 reds, a yellow, and a blue. Pretty nasty, plus it automatically gains a suppression effect that this unit would have to negate too. Our Stuart tank are pretty jumpy, the Stuart crews here, as they're not hardened and used to combat. Now let's calculate the defense dice. Defensive dice for the Stuart is pretty limited. There's no terrain bonus. Its inherent one, which we can see from the unit, when it's taking fire from the front, is a green and a red die. So we're going to add that in, and it's going to get a little bit of a bonus here for the firing through the woods, which is another green die. That's fire comes across there, you add a green die to the defender. Other than that, that's it for the Stuart. So it's in kind of a dicey position here. This is a pretty hefty attack coming at it. So let's see what happens. Tiger opens fire with all of these dice. Sorry, I have to put the blue die back because that's an automatic suppression. The Tiger opens fire. Oh my God, this is nasty. 2 critical hits and 3 hits on the Sherman. Let's put them over here. Oh Lord, this is going to be nasty. So let's see what the Stuart can do to defend itself. Oh, that's actually not that bad. Look at that. Stuart doing some evasive maneuvers here. It negates 4 hits and a critical hit. Let's see what this does. So first up we have the 4 hits are negated. It can negate 3 of them. Now these hits can't negate a critical hit, so it can negate, however, the suppression. So this matches up with this. These 2 hits match up with the suppression and the hit there. The hit matches up with the hit here. The critical hit matches up with the critical hit, leaving us the only thing that's extra here is this extra critical hit on the Stuart, which is still could be pretty significant. So let's calculate our critical hit. We know that it causes 1 hit point of damage on the Stuart. I'll put that up there. Now we're going to do the green roll and blue roll comparison. Green roll for the attacking Tiger. We'll see what happens. Oh, critical hit and a hit. The blue roll gets no defense whatsoever. It's a rough day for the Stuart here. And for the critical hits, only the strongest one is calculated. A critical hit on a vehicle says no damage points are applied, but the vehicle is immobilized. So our Stuart has got its treads blown off and it's been hit. Now, we do have another effect to calculate, which is what happens to the passengers when the vehicle takes a critical hit and damage. So when a vehicle receives a critical hit and there's passengers on it, the unit is immediately flipped to half strength. So our Rangers here, who are hardened, take damage. They've had casualties. In addition to that, they have to perform an emergency disembark, which is jumping off the vehicle, which also kind of makes sense. We're going to have them go forward because they're Rangers. So we're going to have them do an emergency disembark into here. Now this doesn't count as an action, which is kind of helpful for the US forces, but we do have to put a fast action marker on this unit. Whoops, they are hardened, so we'll give them their hardened status here. So our Stuart takes damage. It's got a crack and it's immobilized here. And yeah, that's not a good day for the Stuart, and our Rangers suffer casualties, both sides having casualties now. Now the additional thing here is that this emergency disembark of the Rangers can trigger reaction fire. And I think we actually do want to do reaction fire in this case, which would be probably from one of these two rifle squads. Probably should take a shot at these Rangers. Let's figure out what we're going to do here as the Germans. We take a look right here. This is particularly nasty. This rifle squad up here by the Germans, coming right down here onto the Rangers that have disembarked, has a perfectly open line of fire. So we're going to have them fire. That takes up one of the other actions here as a reaction, so the Germans have now used their second command. This is a range of 6, so let's calculate the attack dice. Firing at infantry, this rifle squad has a red, green, and blue attack die. So we'll pull them out there, and let's calculate all the other bonuses and modifiers that might apply. If we calculate out our dice here, the rifle squad gets blue, red, and green as its attack dice. The only defensive dice that the Rangers get, because it's clear terrain, there's nothing blocking the line of sight, there's not really other special things going on here. They get a yellow die for the characteristics of the Ranger squad itself, and because they are a veteran unit, hardened unit, they get an additional blue die in defense. This is a particularly tough shot here for the Germans, a particularly good shot here for the Germans. Let's see what happens. Germans opening fire on the Rangers that just jumped off the tank. Oh, not very effective fire. We get a hit and a suppression. Let's see how the Rangers can fight off this attack. Oh, hit and a suppression, no effect. So the Rangers have fired, that burns up their action. These Rangers are okay landing in this spot where they are. Do we want to have any other reaction fire from the Germans here? I think at this point in time, no. We're going to save this rifle squad for other actions coming up. So to clean up this attack, we have to apply the losses on the US pressure track. A half strength US Ranger squad compared to a full strength US Ranger squad is a 6, drops down to a 3-point value. So they've lost 3 points of their force pool, increasing their pressure track here with losses. Not a significant infantry, that just a half a squad isn't a big deal really in the overall scope of things, but it still puts a little bit of pressure on the US forces here. So as the US forces now, I think we better get these Rangers off to Stuart before bad things happen to them as well. So we're going to use a command token on one of the US Ranger cards for that, and we're going to have them disembark here into the multi-story building. So they've kind of taken control of the farmstead here, which is really good. Because it's a disembark, they get this fast action thing and their activation ends. However, this disembark can trigger reaction fire. And we're going to have this German squad open fire on the Rangers here as they move into the farmstead. I think that's a pretty good shot, and it's worth taking. So they're going to activate and fire. We're going to need to put up onto that Ranger card a command token, but the Germans have enough to be able to take care of it. So the rifles are going to open fire. Let's calculate this attack. So calculate everything out. The attack gets a blue, red, and green die in their firepower. The Rangers get an inherent yellow die, a red, a green, green for the building, and then a blue because they're hardened. Let's see how this attack goes off. Kind of long odds here for the Germans here, but let's see if they can do some damage. Ooh, hit, critical hit, and a hit. So 2 hits and a critical hit for the Germans. Let's see how the US Rangers, can defend against this. Oh, plenty. 4 hits, 3 critical hits. The Rangers take cover quickly. This unit has ineffective fire, and that brings the end of the US turn here to that action. So let's go now to the German activation. Quick interlude here. I'm coming back to this game now after shooting the video I shot up to here yesterday, then editing it. 3 comments I want to make before we continue on. First up, interestingly enough, this anti-tank gun has a German command point allocated to it. So they're going to lose that command point because they can't use it because this unit is suppressed, which means that the Germans only have 3 actions left in this turn. The second thing, I made a mistake. I noticed a few mistakes. I'll talk about those momentarily, but I did make a mistake here on the Rangers when these German riflemen fired on them. They should have lost their weakest defense die because they had a fast action. There's a penalty on that where you lose your weakest defense die. And that defense die actually led them to not getting suppressed. So they are suppressed. It shouldn't have an impact on combat because they've already acted. They can't do anything. If they take more fire, it could, but just to kind of make that correct. Third thing is I noticed in editing the video, I had a lot of little mistakes with executing the combat. I'm going to talk a little bit in depth at the end of this series when I talk about impressions on the game, and I'll talk particularly about that aspect of it and some things that I think are part of that. So I'll come back to that at the end of the series. With all that being said, let's jump back into the action. So we're going to go right now. It's the Germans' turn. They have 3 actions left. One of the things we definitely want to do is use this Panzer IIIJ for them very well. However, I think I'm going to pass as the Germans, because the US have 5 actions left, and I'm suspecting that we might have some better shots with this if we wait. We also might lose it if we wait, but we're going to take that risk, because I think we need to do some damage with this. I want to see what the US do. So the Germans are going to pass. So as we shift to the US turn, the US has a number of kind of very interesting options. Firing this anti-tank gun, perhaps even at this Panzer IIIJ. It's not a great shot because it's at range and it's got some obstructing terrain, but we also could fire the Stuart, and we could move this Sherman and fire the Sherman, and I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to put this anti-tank gun out of its misery here. So our Sherman is going to do a fire and move, a move and fire. So I have the icon again. This is a typo that's fixed in the final version. They have a movement of 3, so they can move 2 as part of a move and fire here. Now the question we have as the Germans, do we want to take this shot here? And I think because we're crossing this building and it's at long range and the Sherman has pretty decent frontal armor, we're not in, and we lose the attack die on this Panzer, we're not going to take that shot. We're going to hope for a better option. Maybe on that Stuart, I think would give us a better chance because its armor is weaker. So the Sherman is going to move up here and try to take a shot at this anti-tank gun. Let's calculate the attack dice and the defense dice. All right, so I've calculated the attack dice. Sherman at the firing at the artillery gets a red, red, blue. It's going to lose its weakest attack die because it has, from that previous turn, it did a fast action. On the defense, the artillery gets a yellow die from attack to the front. It gets a green die also because it's suppressed. And the Sherman, I did this off camera, failed its spotting roll, so it doesn't really have a good idea where this unit is. It's kind of firing blind, and that, combined with the move and fire, gives an additional red die to the anti-tank gun. So it's a little not as good a shot as we were hoping for, but let's see if the Sherman can put some damage on the anti-tank gun. Again, if they create a fallback kind of situation, an artillery gun is this, oh, that's not too bad. A hit, and a suppression here. Let's see how they defend. Oh, no problems. Hit, critical, suppression. So the anti-tank gun survives this, and that takes care of the attack die there. Fire and move, no effect. We will flip over the command for the Sherman, and now we go to the Germans now, and let's see what we want to have them do. So as the Germans, we are going to expend one of the free command tokens, put it on the rifles here, and move them up into action here. We're going to have them go 1 through the vineyard here, 2 into this clear terrain, and then 3 up into these bushes. Now, these defending US units over here don't really have a very good shot at them because of all the obstructing terrain, so the US is not going to shoot. They have this would be a fast action because they have moved 3, so we'll drop that on them, and that leaves the Germans with 2 commands left this turn. Let's go now to the US turn. As the US, what I'd like to have happen is have this Panzer IIIJ try to move up, and then we could fire at it when it moves up like in here. But I'm just going to sit back and wait as the Germans and just try to take a long shot if that happens. So I'm going to just open up with the anti-tank gun and see if we can get lucky on this Panzer IIIJ. So let's calculate the attack. So our anti-tank gun gets its basic firing here, which is a red, green, blue at this range against the Panzer IIIJ. The Panzer IIIJ gets this as its frontal defense armor, red, yellow, green. Gets a yellow because we're firing across those rocks there. And then it gets a blue additional because it is a veteran unit here. So lots of defense. This isn't a very high percentage shot for the US, but we're going to take it, see what happens, see if we can kind of get lucky here. So the 57mm opens fire on the Panzer IIIJ. 3 hits worth, but there's going to be a lot of defense value here. I think the Panzer IIIJ is really going to have no troubles with this. Yeah, it gets 5 defense here. So no problems for the Panzer there, and the 57mm has expended its action there, and it has fired. Now we go to the Germans' turn. It's time to get this Panzer IIIJ, and I think we're going to be a little aggressive with it. Even though the Stuart can still fire at it, we're going to push the Panzer IIIJ up here. So it's going to push up, and it's got a movement of 3, so we can do a move and fire. And once we get here safely, however, this is really a shot I think we should try to take with the Stuart. It's another long shot, but because this unit is moving into the open and getting a closer range, I think it makes sense to take a shot at it with the Stuart. So Stuart is going to open fire and reaction fire before the Panzer IIIJ can fire. Let's calculate this attack. So the Stuart at this range gets a red, a green, and a blue die. Because it did the fast action last turn, it loses its blue die, leaving it with the red and green die. Panzer IIIJ with its armor gets red, green, and yellow. It gains a green die because it's firing, the Stuart's firing across these woods. It also gains a blue die because of its veteran status. So again, another low percentage shot here. It's just some really tough shots, but let's see if the Stuart can get lucky. 2 hits and a suppression on the Panzer III. I just don't think it's, I mean, everything hit, which is good, but I think that was actually fairly lucky. 2 hits and a suppression. It just matched the defensive value here. So no impact, but that was close. Maybe kind of a glancing blow off the side of the Panzer IIIJ. So this unit now has fired here, and we'll take that off. We don't need that one there anymore. So this unit fired, and that takes the action off of the Stuart, leaving the US with 2 actions. Now the Panzer IIIJ can fire, and what do we want to shoot at? Panzer IIIJ attack dice, it gets a red, a green, and a green as it's firing. It also gets a blue because of its veteran status. It's going to lose that attack die because it did a fast action move in the previous turn. So not a bad attack here. The 57mm gets a yellow for its inherent defense against a frontal attack. It gets a blue and a green for the terrain. It also picks up a green. Even though the unit is automatically spotted because it fired, the Panzer IIIJ is doing a move and fire, which gives this an extra green defense die. So all in all, this isn't a bad shot for the Germans. This could cause problems for the US here. Panzer IIIJ opens fire. Critical hit, critical hit, critical kill. 2 critical hits and 2 hits. This could be bad for the 87, for the anti-tank gun. The crew takes cover. Oh, this is gonna be bad. It looks like a critical hit. So we match up, these are the attacking ones. The 2 hits here take away the 2 hits. The critical here takes away the critical hit here. However, there's 1 extra critical hit, and this hit, like, it doesn't matter, doesn't do enough. So there's a critical hit on the anti-tank gun. Uh-oh, Germans dealing damage. So we know the critical hit does a first damage point on it. So casualties on the anti-tank gun. Now we're gonna roll a green die for the Germans and a blue die for the US to see its extra effect. Oh, the blue die is a hit. It negates the suppression by the Germans, so no further effect. So casualties on the anti-tank gun, but not a ton. So the US get lucky there and survive that, but we do have casualties on both sides now. Let's go. That is the Germans' move. They only have 1 command left in this turn. Now we go to the US, who have 2 commands left. We're going to start to bring these Rangers into action. We're going to have them move out here. We're going to do a normal move, and we're going to have them go 1. And then at this point in time, just because I'm not sure I see anything else that I really like for the Germans, other sides maybe moving some of these furthest units up, we're going to have this rifle squad here, which hasn't fired yet, try a long shot. I'm just kind of curious to see how it works. It's actually only getting blocked, hindered by this terrain in here. So let's calculate this attack. They're going to do reaction fire, which would be a normal fire here for them. So we'll drop that down, and this is the last German action of the turn. It's a free one. We can put it from there up onto that rifle squad. So the rifle squad opens fire. Let's calculate the attack. So the rifle squad at this range, firing against infantry, gets a yellow, blue, blue die. The Rangers, because of their inherent defense, get a yellow. They also get a green because the fire is going through these light woods here, and then they get a blue because of their hardened status here. They get an extra die. Let's see what happens. The Germans open up with their rifle squad. 2 hits. Okay, so that's not too bad. The Rangers defending get 3 hits. No effect. They will continue their move then. They avoid that fire and continue on bravely forward and end up right here on their second move. I think the goal is we can push them up with a fast action move next turn, maybe get them up here into these light woods and really start to kind of take some nice defensive terrain here for the US. The Germans are now done because the only command they have left is on their anti-tank gun, which was allocated, and that has been, that can't be used because it got suppressed. That leaves the US with 1 more action here, and I think we will. So let's see what we can do with snipers. I've not used them yet, so I want to kind of check them out. We're going to have them, they have a movement of 2. We'll have them do a fast action, so 1, 2, 3, move up here into this building. Actually, they can go on the road, so they can go 1, 2, 3 up into the building like that along the road. And that is their fast action. We will drop that here. And that finishes the final US action and the final German action of turn 2. Now let's clean up and clear up what's happened here. So I'll do that momentarily and we'll take a look at what's happened. So we've cleaned up, flipped over the yellows to the whites. We have a number of units that are going to have their attack die reduced to the next turn. Our machine gun now has ambush capability because it was dug in and hidden from before. So it, not dug in, but hidden from before. So now it's got ambush capability, and the US have taken control of this victory objective. An interesting turn. We've had casualties here on both anti-tank guns, but they've survived. The Stuart gets its tread blown off and it's gotten damaged. This squad range of Rangers here, what they're pushing up here, has been cut down half to strength. But more importantly, the US have gained the victory objective. That's going to change our troop management and the kind of the overall status of the action here. But both sides, despite the volleys of fire going back and forth, both sides remaining relatively intact. The US taking more damage, of course, than the Germans, and that perhaps could pay off in the next turn, but they have gained a lot of ground and have a nice solid defensive position. Let's take a quick look at the troop management board. We have 2 things to do here. Because the US gained that victory point objective, their entire pressure drops down by 1. If they were to gain the other victory point objective, they would win and hold it. However, that's a very strong, tall task here. We do also want to move up the turn marker to turn 3. And with that, that brings us to the end. We'll be back for this episode. We'll be back for turn 3 pretty soon. I think we'll start to go 2 turns an episode. We should go faster, as I'm not going to be explaining as much of the calculations going forward. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.